Hello again, 122. In this video, we're starting with Chapter 19, continuing with European history and the beginnings of modernization and industrialization and the forces of nationalism and liberalism. I will have 4 different parts for this chapter. In this first one, we're going to talk about some of the reasons and try to summarize why the Industrial Revolution began in Britain. And before any sort of industrialization really can take place, you're going to have enough of a labor supply. And that's one of the reasons why it happened here, because the Brits had become successful with their agriculture. They had more than enough food being produced. They had solved that problem. And because they had become so very efficient, prices of food had gone down, and most British citizens did not have to use the majority of their disposable income to purchase food, and they had money left over then to begin to purchase some of these items of industrial production. Also, other reasons why is, as we'll see, the Brits have many of the natural resources that were necessary to conduct this first industrial revolution. There is a rapid population growth in the second part of the 1700s or the 18th century, and there is plenty of labor then to supply the factories of the emerging British industry. And through the course of all of those wars in the 1700s, Britain had assembled a vast colonial empire. And this empire is also going to be the source of both raw materials and markets for the finished goods that are being produced in these new factories. And British exports quadruple in that 100-year period from 1660 through 1760. And they will try to prevent in most of their colonies any sort of industrialization going on, so they will continue to have this market. And that's going to lead to problems, as we'll see in the 20th century, in many of these areas then that will be dissatisfied with this arrangement. Also, the traditional methods of production are not enough to keep up with the growing demand for cotton clothes throughout Britain and its vast empire. And faced with this problem, British cloth manufacturers readily adopted the new methods of manufacturing that a series of inventions provided. And in so doing, these individuals ignited the Industrial Revolution. All of these different entrepreneurs and inventors like James Hargreaves' spinning jenny, which allowed spinners to produce more yarn, Edmund Cartwright's power loom, which was powered by water, and it was invented in that year. Another one was John Kay invented the flying shuttle. The steam engine was a huge invention that took the cotton industry to even greater heights of productivity. James Watt, the Scot, invented a powered steam engine that could empty the water out of a mine 3 times as quickly as previous engines. And in 1782, he built a rotary engine that that could turn a shaft and thus drive machinery. And now steam power begins to replace the water power that had previously been used in these textile mills. And the textile industry is where the Industrial Revolution really begins. And eventually they will use coal, which is a natural resource that Britain had in abundance, to fire those steam engines. And once that takes place, they no longer have to locate factories by a water source. They could be located anywhere. And by 1840, by about the middle of the 19th century, 366 million pounds of cotton, a lot of it coming from the Americas and the plantation system of the South, and also more and more as the 19th century goes on, from the crown jewel of the empire, India, will also be producing much of this cotton that is then transported back by the vast British Navy, both merchant and military, and it will be then spun into cotton products in all of those various factories in England and elsewhere in Britain. And they're selling this stuff all over the world. Another big invention was the new method of producing iron. And this is another natural resource that Great Britain possessed. Iron ore they had in mass quantities. And Henry Cort developed the puddling system in which coke derived from coal is used to burn away the impurities. And this was another booming industry then. And by 1852, Britain was producing almost 3 million tons of iron annually, more than the rest of the world combined. So in textiles, and in iron, and in the last one, the new industries that will be developed out of using this new metal, the rail comes in, and steam power is applied to the locomotives on these new railroads. And eventually, Trevithick's powered locomotive will be replaced by engines built by George Stephenson and his son. And that rocket rail will actually go 15 miles an hour. And this was the first public line that opened from Liverpool to Manchester in 1830. And the railroad is very important to the success and the maturing of the Industrial Revolution. The availability of cheaper and faster means of transportation had a ripple effect on the growth of the industrial economy. As the prices of goods fell, markets grew larger, and increased sales meant more factories and more machinery, thereby reinforcing the self-sustaining aspect of the Industrial Revolution, a development that marked a fundamental break with the traditional European economy. And it seemed to be continuous, never-ending growth seems to be the new characteristic of this new economy. But as we'll see in the 20th century, and also in parts of the 19th century, these economies do not continually grow. There will be downturns. And this also creates a new type of relationship between workers and management. Factory owners want to use their machines constantly. Workers were therefore, they have to work regular hours now. And this was a break from the past because peasant farmers had worked hard, but only at harvest or at planting time. And then there's a lot of period of downtime or a lot of period of inactivity where they don't have to work so hard. But now work, factory time becomes a way of life. And employers will use various methods like fines or dismissals for drunkenness on the job. It's dangerous to work drunk around many of these textile machines. You can get killed, or you can fall into these ovens that are using the puddling system to make iron. And it's dangerous to lose your job as well because of the huge population. There is a mass amount of unskilled labor readily available. Children aren't going to understand the implications of dismissal, and discipline used on child labor was usually pretty fierce. They usually were beat or whipped. But as the 19th century progressed, the second and third generations of workers came to view a regular work week as a natural way of life. And that's one of the effects of the Industrial Revolution on British life and on the workers. They became used to factory time. And conditions were not always good in these industrial cities. They were dirty places. They were unsanitary. Those are some of the effects. Air pollution becomes a big problem in Britain as well because of all the burning of coke and coal. It's a very dirty and very air polluting natural resource. And by the mid-19th century, Great Britain is the world power. It's the richest and first industrial nation, and the United States comes in then in the second industrial revolution of the second part of the 19th century, which is largely driven by electricity and steel. But in 1850, Britain is producing half of the world's coal and manufactured goods, and its cotton industry alone was equal in size to the industries of all the other European countries combined. This is a very, very prosperous country. And that ends this particular part 1.